All right, that's a lot of theoretical concepts about containers and Kubernetes. Let's go ahead and get started with the lab exercises for Kubernetes. And as and when we encounter new things, I'll start explaining about it. So let's get started with that. The first thing that I'm going to do is to go ahead and create a Kubernetes cluster. To do that, we can go ahead and click on create a resource. Although there are multiple ways of doing it, you can go to all services or use the search box and then type Kubernetes there, just like the way we did earlier. But then I'm just trying to show you a new way here. So type Kubernetes and then select Kubernetes service and click on create. All right, so as always with every other service, we'll fill up these values and walk through the wizard. Okay, I'll leave the subscription as it is and choose my resource group. It looks like I don't have a resource group to host Kubernetes. I'll go and create a new one here, call it as dev rg or something, and click OK. All right, that's gonna be my new resource group. Give a Kubernetes cluster name as well. I'll call it as web app hyphen cluster. Okay, and then I'll leave the region as it is, but you know that there are so many regions to choose from. Okay, the latest version today is 1.1.73, and if I'm using this for production purposes, I will not use it because it's still in preview. I'll choose something less than 1.17, which is 1.16. Okay, what is the DNS prefix? It is automatically selected for me, but then if you do not like it, and if you would like to have your own DNS name prefix for your cluster, feel free to get rid of it and type your own. Okay, I'll leave it as it is now. The next option is the node size. There are a range of node sizes to choose from here. So depending on the workloads that you're going to run on your Kubernetes cluster, you might want to pick and choose the amount of CPU, the memory, etc. For now, it's okay. I will leave it as it is. So what I have now is DS2 V2, which is giving me 2 vCPUs and 7 gigs of memory. Okay, I'll leave it as it is. That's fine. And just in case if there isn't a problem, you can always go ahead and upgrade this to next level. All right. The next option is scaling. As you run applications in AKS clusters, you may need to increase and decrease the amount of computing resources. So as the number of applications grow and they change, the number of underlying Kubernetes nodes may also need to change. So you may also need to quickly provision a large number of additional application instances. And that's what scaling means. In real production environments, you'd always like to have this done automatically instead of choosing a manual option. But yeah, you can always manually scale the replicas, the pods. You can test how the replication responds to a change in available resources. But then that's not the recommended method to have manual scaling of pods or nodes. It's good to have automatic scaling done. So under the scaling section, you got two options. There's virtual nodes and then there is, I will leave both of them as enabled and then click on next. The next option is role-based access control. Would you like to have a role-based access control integrating that with Active Directory? Yes or no? So let's say you got a lot of developers accessing your application and you would like to grant them access so that they can then connect to the clusters and deploy and publish those applications into the cluster. Well, how would you grant access to them? It's only possible with role-based access control, and hence it's important to enable it. By now, we know that in Azure Kubernetes services, there is a managed node. It's totally managed by Microsoft. But then if that node or your nodes have to communicate with each other back and forth and perform some activities, how would that happen? It would happen with the help of a service principal. Now, this service principal would be used to manage your cloud resources which are attached to your cluster, right? So I will let it create a service principal name and click on next to choose the networking options. Let's walk through the various options we have under networking. At times you may need to grant public access to your cluster. If that is the case, then you will leave the private cluster option to disable. But if you would like to grant it a private access, that means the Kubernetes cluster is routable within your LAN environment or within your VNet, then that's when it goes to enabled. Let's talk about the HTTP application routing. Now this particular option here, if you choose to yes, it will deploy two things. One is an ingress controller and second is an external DNS controller. Okay, so the ingress controller is exposed to the internet by using the Kubernetes service of type load balancer. The ingress controller watches and implements the ingress resources and creates routes to the application endpoints. The second point, which is the external DNS controller, watches for any Kubernetes ingress resources and creates a DNS A record in the cluster specific DNS zone. By enabling HTTP application routing, you are making it easy to access applications that are deployed in your AKS cluster through the internet. Because here you're configuring the ingress controller and letting it create a publicly accessible DNS name for application endpoints. Okay. All right, I'll leave it as yes. The load balancer type is standard in this case. By default, I've got the network configuration switched to advanced, and that means that I will have the options to create my own virtual network. What does that mean? It means that you're hosting your Kubernetes cluster in one of the subnets that you're defining here. You cannot toggle it back to basic now because if you flip back to one of the previous sections, I've selected virtual nodes here and it is enabled, right? I will flip it to disable for a second, go to the next section under networking, and you'll see that we now have the options to switch to the basic option, which means that the IP addresses to the clusters and the nodes will be given by Microsoft and cannot be managed by us. If I choose advanced, I will then have the options to create my own VNet and host my Kubernetes cluster in my own subnet. You can also assign what IP address ranges it should have. This is great for environments that have on-premise to Azure VNet connectivity with a point-to-site, site-to-site, or even express route connection where you would like to have private routing or private connectivity between on-premise and the resources in Azure. Okay, so I will leave these options as is. Let it create a virtual network with the name dev.rg vnet. That's my subnet name. That's fine. So I'll accept these starter blocks and click on next. Under the monitoring section, would you like to have Azure Monitor integrated with Kubernetes cluster? You can see how beautifully things are getting integrated into other services to get the most benefit out of monitoring, let's say, or even role-based access control under the authentication or networking features under the networking section. So I do not have to write my own API calls or any other procedures to integrate with other services and get the benefit out of them. So by just moving this to yes or toggling to yes, I will have the monitoring of my CPU, memory, network statistics, performance statistics, all thrown up on the dashboards of Azure Monitor. And then I'm able to create a workspace in log analytics as well to do better troubleshooting, to do better performance analysis and diagnostics about the behavior of my Kubernetes cluster. All right, so that's my log analytics workspace, and I'm going to have Kubernetes container monitoring on at this time. I'll move on to tags. You know what tags are? You can have a CMDB here, so you can type owner is Rob and you type Rob's email address and then their department or maybe their cost center, and then you can charge them back because you got the cost center here, right? This is more for governance purposes and compliance purposes as well. Great. So finally click on review and create. Let it validate my options. And if everything is green, everything is good, I'll click on create. All right. So this create button is enabled for me. I'll click on create. It will take a couple of minutes to deploy that cluster in my subscription. So I'll pause the video for now and connect again once it is ready.